Hey folks, it's that time. It's time for another session of Getting to Know Dynatrace. And today we're very happy to have Carl Audet, so colleague of mine from Montreal, who's going to be walking us through a demonstration. So folks, as you remember, or if you've been to one of these Getting to Know Dynatrace sessions, what we like to do is we like to do a couple of upfront segments and then turn things over to Carl to do a demonstration. Now, this is going to be a live demonstration, and one of the things that we'll definitely want is for you to participate. We want you to ask questions, so please feel free to ask questions as we're going through this demonstration. Just go ahead, type those questions out into the chat, and we'll do our best to answer them. So let me get started by, let's see here if I can just share my screen, and there we go. Now we're into it, Getting to Know Dynatrace. The very first segment of Getting to Know Dynatrace is always what's new. And you can, of course, go to dynatrace.com/blog, and you can see all sorts of different things that are going on here at Dynatrace. Now, if you have been following the Getting to Know Dynatrace sessions over the past several months, you will have heard me dropping hints about exciting announcements that we were planning to do this fall. And I've been hinting at things, and I've been just sort of dancing around things, saying, hey, wait, well, this is the week where we made a major announcement to the industry. And that, the most important thing this week on Getting to Know Dynatrace in the What's New segment, it's all about Grail. So what is Grail? Grail, ultimately is a causational data lakehouse with a massive parallel processing analytics engine underneath it. It leverages the new Dynatrace query language for context-rich analytics. That's a lot, to say. Ultimately, this is a new way of being able to store and analyze data. Dynatrace, like everyone else, our platforms are built upon, different types of technologies. If you peeled back the layers underneath Dynatrace, you would see things like, a Cassandra data store, Elastic indexing. There's, common technologies that are being used to power Dynatrace. And what we found is we've reached an inflection point. And that inflection point is, basically those technologies ultimately aren't able to take us to the very next steps. And so from our standpoint, we looked at this problem and we decided that we needed to take a brand new approach. And with this brand new approach, with this Grail technology, what it will allow us to do is it'll allow us to get insights into billions of dependencies to be able to do analytics in context. It will allow us to get to a point where we can ingest thousands of petabytes, yes, thousands of petabytes of data a day, and be able to retain that information for much longer periods of time than what you've traditionally seen in the market. It will allow us to query that information 5 to 100 times faster. So you'll be able to query and parse this information and execute those queries utilizing that massive parallel processing where we're literally spinning up and utilizing thousands of nodes of compute power to execute these queries. These queries then ultimately become instantaneous. And that's one of at the heart, the power of what this Grail platform allows us to do. And we feel that we're going to be the first all-in-one platform that really brings observability, security, and business data together. And so from the Dynatrace standpoint, we are weaving this Grail technology into our underlying architecture. It will allow us to basically answer and drive intelligent automation from data. And this starts from the moment that we acquire the data, being able to acquire the data in a context-rich, full stack, standpoint, being able to take advantage of, open telemetry, open source mechanisms for ingesting data, and then being able to actually store this in a way that can be analyzed in utilizing this massive processing and retrieval capabilities of this underlying Grail technology, and then allowing our AI to understand and look at that data in an intelligent fashion to understand the richness, the context, the dependencies that our Smartscape helps us discover. And what that really allows us to focus in on are use cases that are focused around observability, security and protection, and also driving automation. So Grail is not something that you're going to license from Dynatrace. It's not going to be a SKU. It's not a licensable thing. It's an underlying part of our platform. And what it does is it enables additional use cases. It enables us to do things that we previously haven't been able to do before. One of the ways that we're leveraging this underlying data store to allow us to do things in a much more intelligent fashion is by providing you with a new query language called DQL, the Dynatrace query language, and is built to basically take advantage of this power and be able to provide you with effortless migration. The learning curve for DQL is minimal. It just makes sense. If you look at the way that it's structured, it's very easy to understand. It's going to be very familiar to power users. So if you're already familiar with technologies like Splunk, you'll look at DQL and you'll go, that makes total sense. And it's purpose-built for observability and security. Basically, it's going to provide up to 50% reduced times to query. It will provide over 10 times faster parsing versus typical regex. Now, if you've ever used regex before, you'll understand why this is important, because regex, honestly, I've used it lots of times, and it's, for me, always been a trial and error. I bring up a regex tool, I create my regex string, and then I'm usually messing around trying to understand, hey, did this work? It didn't do what I wanted it to. And so basically this new DQL is going to probably reduce by up to 90% the amount of trial and error that people normally do working with regex. If you've ever worked with regex, you know exactly what I'm talking about. And as I said, this is simple to understand. So these queries, they're readable. And what does that do? That basically means that there's like 100 times increase in productivity on query building and collaboration, because when people look at these queries, they can make sense. They don't have those complex regexes in them, which quite honestly is really difficult for humans to read and understand. And this basically allows us to do step-by-step data pipe logic versus rapidly incomprehensible SQL style queries. So this is a brand new way of being able to access this data. We've been working on this for quite some time. We're very happy about what we've been able to produce so far. And at this point, this was the big announcement this week. So the what's new here at Dynatrace, it's all about this Grail technology. So that's it for the What's New segment. It's a big sort of, it's a big changes here at Dynatrace, and this Grail technology is really at the heart of it. So let's get on to the next segment before we get into the demo, and that's the Did You Know? And since the very first use case of Grail is going to focus on logs and business analytics, let's actually look at a part of the log monitoring capabilities of Dynatrace. And did you know that you can actually create metrics from logs using Dynatrace? And so whether or not you're using Dynatrace to, when you're monitoring your logs, if you're using them to, count specific log records that are showing up, so creating a count, That's something that we've been able to do for quite some time. But also, you may not be aware of this, but we can also pull out and capture attribute values as well. Within Dynatrace, within the settings, you can go into the log management settings and you can create log metrics. And ultimately, you can use rules to generate metrics from your logs. And now that's going to be even enhanced more so with the advent and the use of this new technology, this DQL or Dynatrace Query Language. So if you didn't know that we could do that, we absolutely can do that. And there's a whole bunch of other capabilities that Dynatrace has around capturing logs. There are, in many cases, when you deploy a Dynatrace 1 agent, it will automatically go out and understand if a process or if a host has log files on it, and will automatically, in many cases, start monitoring those log files for you. So there's a whole bunch of functionality that we're going to be supercharging when it comes to log monitoring with this Grail technology. And that's literally, folks, just scratching the surface of what we're going to be bringing to the market over the course of the next year. So stay tuned for even more exciting announcements about this. So that's it for this week's Did You Know segment. I think it's time for us to get to the segment that everybody tunes in for, and that is the demo. And so at this point, I'm gonna turn my screen off, and I'm gonna let's see. I'm gonna stop sharing here, and we're gonna hand things over to Carl. So Carl, hey, listen, welcome to Getting to Know Dynatrace. It's a pleasure to have you on today's session. Tell us a little bit about yourself, and then let's get into a demo.
Thank you very much for this introduction. My pleasure to be here with you today. Maybe before we start with the demo in the intro, there was a question about what you just presented about Grail. So I don't know if you want to pick it. Basically, there's Alfred who is asking if Grail is built by ourselves and if it's purpose built for monitoring. So either you or me can.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Well, I would say yes, it is definitely purpose built for monitoring, and it is definitely built by Dynatrace. So this is, we literally, as I mentioned at the very beginning, we reached this sort of inflection point where we understood that there is this explosion of data that our customers are seeing. So if you think back to when all the applications that were being monitored were monolithic, there was, known amounts about those monolithic applications in terms of I had a known number of metrics. I had a known amount of log data that was being ingested. But now applications aren't monolithic. Applications are hybrid, heterogeneous in their makeup. They can have container technology, serverless technology. You can have hybrid deployments where part of your application might exist on premise, part of it might exist up in the cloud. And a tremendous amount of data now is being generated around these applications. And we just realized that, ultimately, the market is literally at this inflection point where there's so much data that the current technologies that most organizations are using, ourselves included, simply weren't up to the task of being able to provide the answers and drive the automation that we know our customers were looking to do. Hence why we decided to take an entirely different approach. And what we'll do is in future segments of Getting to Know Dynatrace, we'll make sure to bring on some product architects and maybe some product managers to help explain a little bit about what's going on underneath the hood related to Grail. Carl, is there anything you want to add about that?
No, I think you basically just described the gist of it. What I would add is it relies on we needed to move the storage on using cutting edge services from cloud providers. And when I say cutting edge, there's still some Amazon data center that we're still waiting on upgrade to offer that in very specific regions to give you an idea. So it's massive parallel processing, which gives us the power to query vast amounts of data very, very efficiently.
Very cool. And folks, hey, listen, thank you very much for the questions. Remember, please ask those questions. That's what makes these getting to know Dynatrace sessions so fun, so informative, and so exciting. So please, if you have questions as we're going through today's demo, ask away. We'll try our best to get them answered. And if we can't get them answered, we'll do our best after the fact to find out what the answers are and get those to you. And with that, then Carl, hey, let's start doing a demo.
Sure. Thank you. So first of all, I'm Carl Audet, a solution engineer for Dynatrace. I'm based in Montreal. I've been working with Dynatrace now for a bit over a year and a half. Prior to that, I have over 20 years of experience in small enterprise to large business, mainly in the telecom, the aviation, and the banking industry. When I came in contact, first in contact with Dynatrace, it was in 2014 when I was working in the telecom industry, and I was mostly within working with operation teams. I've been for years on 24/7 on call all year round, and I was with the SWAT teams that would end up in war room when the things went south in production. And back then, our legacy solution, which is Appmon, really changed my vision, my perspective that I have on monitoring solutions and what they can do, what they can provide. It literally changed my career, and I was really, really happy to join a team of very smart and inspiring people a year and a half ago, and still happy to work with them. You'll have to bear with my French Canadian accent, as you can hear. With that, let's start the demo.
Carl, don't worry about that French Canadian accent. During these getting to know Dynatrace sessions, we have people coming in from all over the globe. And so, folks, if you want to put in the chat where you're coming in from today, please feel free. Let us know. It's great to see people. Sometimes we have people that are coming in from Brazil, from Europe, from Asia, although it's really early in the morning over there. So by all means, feel free to just sort of drop a little note in there and let us know where you're coming from. And Carl, back to you. Let's get into this.
So a bit of history first on the Dynatrace platform and how it came to be before jumping into the technical side of the demo. So Dynatrace historically has been an application monitoring solution. That's what it was when I came in contact with it in 2014. Dynatrace was started in 2005. It was basically how many people in 2005, John Z? I don't really.
Oh, it was a small company at the time. Let me tell you, it was
Less than 50 people.
Oh yeah, less than 50 for sure.
Now we're close to 4,000 employees. And basically, we became known for application monitoring. So if I describe a bit what it was when I came in contact with Dynatrace, you had agents specific to various technology, various supported technology, mainly Java application and .NET application, as well as web server, Apache, IIS, Nginx, that sort of components. And what you had to do if you want to have visibility on your end-to-end visibility on your production system, you needed to install a Java agent for Windows on that server. And for each Java process, you needed to configure and install a Java agent. It was fairly simple, fairly straightforward. And then it gave you visibility, end-to-end visibility, tracing from node to node. And it was, for me, it was a game changer when I saw that. The issue, though, is that deployment model of having separate agents for all the technology. So I needed a Java agent for my AIX server, a different Java agent needed to configure on my 10 WebSphere servers on that AIX or on that those Tomcat instances running on Solaris. So when you were within on-prem data center, that was still manageable. At the scale of today, with the dynamic environment and cloud-based environment, that's not really something that scales well. So that was one thing that our engineers started working on with the new Dynatrace platform to replace our legacy solution. And the solution that they came for the ease of deployment is what we call the one agent, which is a play of word, the one agent to rule them all. There's fans of Lord of the Rings, obviously, in Austria. in our development team. So basically, the way we do installation right now, if I do a manual installation, all I need is there's one version of the agent per type of OS. So if I have a Linux box and I have a shell script which contains the binary, the configuration, that everything that's needed to connect to my Dynatrace instance, and it's going to automatically discover all the supported technology. If there's Java and Nginx, Node.js, any supported technology, they're going to be automatically instrumented at the first restart after the deployment of the agent. What the one agent will do as well, which is a bit different than what we used to do with our legacy solution, is it's going to start baselining automatically all the metrics, the KPI at the infrastructure and the service level. So that if you want to monitor, you don't need to set static threshold on the thousands of KPIs that you will end up collecting from the agent deployed in your environment. So you can do that if you need to. You can set static threshold and alert when there's 95% of usage of CPU on that server, or you can let Dynatrace alert you when it deviates from its norm, from its automatically learned baseline. So that's one thing that the one agent does. It will also start to map the topology of your whole environment, and both in a vertical and horizontal fashion. So that's what we're currently looking on my screen, that large constellation of dots. This is the service layer in a demo environment that we have. I have a little under 600 services right now. And what I see is the horizontal topology. So what I mean by that is here there's a Tomcat service, and I see what that Tomcat service is calling and what calls that Tomcat service, so the horizontal topology. If I click on that Tomcat service, I see that there two end user. There's a mobile application and a web user application that rests on that service. In Dynatrace context, an application we call an application, it's going to be either a web application, a mobile application, or a custom application. We could even do deployment in IoT devices, for instance, but that's mainly an end user application. Typically, we have agents that can be embedded within iOS or Android apps, which will automatically collect data such as requests, touches on the UI, and we can customize those applications with our SDK if you want to add more fine-grained detail into your mobile application, or much easier to do. Much simpler to do is the web application monitoring. Automatically, we will inject a JavaScript agent within the pages on the web servers. It can be from an Apache and Nginx, or even from Java from a servlet. It will automatically inject the agent in the served page, and what that will allow us to do is to have real user monitoring. So you won't only see the requests that are coming to your front-end servers. You will see the experience from the end user side, from his browser. So the whole user session, the whole sequence of action, is it slow because the requests to your server are slow, or is it a problem within his browser? So I'm going to show that a bit later. So I was describing the horizontal topology here, and we see the vertical topology. So that, in this case, that Tomcat service rests on the Tomcat process, which has three other services configured in it. It rests on a Linux host, which has all these processes, all these services, and that Linux host rests within a data center in Azure, and we see everything that's connected from that data center. So I have two Windows boxes, three Linux instances, and I have a whole set of Azure services. We have integration for all the cloud providers. So if you have an RDS database, S3 buckets, you have services offered by cloud provider. We can monitor through Azure Monitor or CloudWatch integration. We will ping the endpoints of your cloud provider GCP as well. To gather metrics, we can gather metrics, we can gather logs. In the case of Lambda function, we can even inject our tracing within those, so you don't lose the end-to-end tracing in those functions. So that's what we see here, all the different services, type of services, and their instances. So that topology here, it's also a really nice thing because it becomes complex quite um, quite rapidly in real large enterprise environment. This is a pretty simple environment that we have here. I'm going to show an example of a real example of real life complexity and enterprise complexity in terms of modeling a bit later. But what is really nice is all that topology is not only it's not like a CMDB. It's not scanned once per day. It's maintained in real time. As soon as it changes, it's going to be updated. So it will always be much more accurate than any sort of existing current CMDB scanning solution, which are looking at network connection, and they don't usually typically won't have the level of depth that we have. Our agent is injected within the software component within Java and .NET, so it sees what process, what services speak to what other services. So the level of detail from that topology and the accuracy is really useful when we want to do correlation with our own correlation engine, our, well, AI ops engine, which is called Davis, which I'm going to show you later. Basically, what Davis does is instead of traditionally what you would get with all the monitoring for those layers here, if there's a cascading effect, like a database that is slow that causes issue on backend servers, which are causing issues on front-end servers, and then end user experience, typically you would get a flood of maybe 10, 20, 50 alerts, and you need to triage those and see what's a potential root cause, what's potentially impacted, what's the side effect of what. We use that topology model to guide you as much as possible and point you in the right direction, often to the very specific root cause with our Davis engine using that topology. So small detour just to show you how easy it is to deploy Dynatrace. If I come on my Dynatrace instance here and I want to instrument a new Linux box, for instance, what I would need to do is come into the Dynatrace hub here, which has all the extension for the supported technology. There's a few hundreds of them. But the main thing that you would deploy first in a Dynatrace when you set up Dynatrace is our one agent. So I simply come here. And let's say that I would have a Linux box to instrument. I select Linux here. I can create or enter an already existing token to authorize my agent to speak to my environment. And once it's created, I only copy paste those three commands here, which is one to download the installation script, which contains the binary and the configuration to talk to that instance. I can verify the signature just to be safe. And then I run I copy paste that command. And then the Dynatrace will start monitoring that host. And after their first restart, all the supported services will be monitored with full end-to-end tracing. And if there's a front end, a web application that is served, those web pages will start being monitored as well by the JavaScript agent. So what does that look like? I'm going to go layer by layer, starting by the infrastructure level, the most basic one. So this is a VM that is within VMware. It would be similar for an EC2 instance in or an Azure instance. The difference is we have different integration, which allows you to jump, for instance, from VMware. I can jump from that VM to its actual host here using our integration with VMware. So I can see the other VMs on that, and I can get the events from VMware, which is really nice. So if there's a vMotion event because it was set to automatically migrate from one host to the other, I would see it here, and I would see it within the page of this host within the events here. Right now, there's none. So what I can see at a basic level is obviously your usual KPIs for a host, like CPU usage, memory, resource usage. What's interesting here, I can see from a topology perspective what talks to that box and what that Linux box is talking to. So here I have the monitored host talking to that machine and the monitored host that machine is calling. I can get that data at the process level using this button here. So here I see that this Tomcat is being called by this other Tomcat on another host. And when I click on it, I will see the metrics for that connection. If I have a connectivity issue, I have an issue of retransmission on a specific machine, I would see that at the process level right here. And right now I'm looking manually at those values, but once again, those values are baseline automatically. And whenever they deviate from the norm, you will get automatically alerted if needed.
So, hey, Carl, before you leave that screen, I want to take a moment. So, one of the interesting things about the one agent is that it has a number of different components to it. There's definitely the system monitoring component that you're showing where we're just pulling in metrics. There is a component of the agent that obviously is now, and has done log monitoring, and that's becoming quite important now as we start moving into this Grail space. There's a component of the agent that's called the monitoring extension, which is basically, you could think of it as, this is the stuff that's doing the transaction tracing. And then there's a component which is doing network monitoring. So it's actually doing a small amount of PCAP or packet capture. That packet capture data is what the result of that is what Carl is showing us right here. So rather than trying to figure out, net flows and all that kind of thing, what Dynatrace is doing here is basically the agent is doing this packet capture and understanding at a process level what processes are talking to what other processes that are running on different hosts, both upstream and downstream from where I might be at in this particular case. So it's a really useful tool for understanding if there are network issues. And that's just part and parcel of something the one agent does. Sorry, Carl, I just wanted to throw that in there because
thank you.
This NetFlow, a lot of people aren't even aware that it exists. And the process connection map here is super easy to get to and really useful when you're trying to understand if there's an issue from a connectivity standpoint between different components.
And right now we're looking at the macro level at one specific host, but what is nice is we have views to view that at an environment level. So without having anything set up to monitor, we can monitor via extension via SNMP and APIs, networking equipment. We have extensions for that. But without that, just with the one agent, you get a very good view, an overall view of if you have it deployed on the VMs in your data center. Here I have a sort of a summary of all the data collected by our one agent, which I can filter by tags, by type of VM, by data center. So that's really helpful to understand network issues or retransmission issues, or if there's huge spike in traffic, and I want to understand why is is my network traffic for a specific data center really high? It's really quick to pinpoint the host and the single process or the multiple processes that are generating that traffic.
And this becomes so critical because the traditional way of monitoring the network in the past, and this, some of us come from, like, historically, some of us come from a company called CompuWare. And at CompuWare, we offered these appliances that you would span traffic into, right? And so that network tap, those network spans, they were the traditional way of monitoring the network. But now your applications are much more complicated in terms of they can be deployed in these hybrid scenarios where part of your workload's on premise, part of it's up in the cloud. Well, for those workloads that are up in the cloud, you can't span ports up into the cloud. That doesn't work that way anymore. I don't have physical access, so I can't span my traffic into an appliance. So the traditional way of monitoring the network when it was a physical asset has changed because now the network's much more of a logical thing. It's more of a logical construct than it is a physical asset like it was back in the day when we were monitoring our monoliths. So very cool stuff. Thanks for walking us through that, Carl.
Thank you. What we can see beyond the key metrics, we'll start also collecting stats at the process level. And historically, with our legacy project, you would only see if you instrument two Java process on a host, you would only see these, as well as maybe an Apache server in front, which is resting on the same host. But you wouldn't see what was going on that host beyond what you would instrument. Right now, I'm able to see that if there's a CPU or network contention, I can drill down at the process level, and we do all processes that have significant usage, including when Jonesy was talking about the one agent component. Well, we see these are tagged with Dynatrace, so we monitor ourselves. Often a question when people are first coming in contact, and that was my first question as well. When I saw Dynatrace, the first demo Dynatrace with the level of depth that it showed me, my first thought that this is impossible. You don't have that level of detail without impacting the performance of my application. Well, we monitor ourselves both at the host level, at the process level. So if we would use too many resources usage, we don't exclude ourselves from our monitoring. So you see how much memory, how much network, how much CPU it consumes. And even that within the process, if our one agent or Java agent consuming too many resources, you would see that as well within the detail. We have what we call the method hotspot, which I'll show a bit later, which is a bit like a profiler, but made for production environment. So a really efficient profiler to give you detail on the code execution of your application process. Okay, so at the host level, what we get, if you're in a cloud environment, you will have all the metadata here, the tagging from Google, Amazon, Azure, it's going to be collected, and you can use this for customizing views for teams, for giving permissions. It's really useful, filtering, dashboarding. Here, what I see is the process that we can we do deep monitoring, so that we can inject into and do tracing and code level insights. Our one agent can automatically collect the logs. All you have to do, it's going to do an inventory of all the logs that the host or the process are writing to automatically, and so you can pick and choose which logs you want to collect from the one agent. So if I go in one of these process, now we're at the process level. So that's one executable running like you would see in your task manager or your Nmon or on Linux. Here we see once again the topology. So which process are calling that process and which process are being called by that process. We see once again the metric that are automatically baselines, the resource usage. You're going to have technology-related metrics. So for Java, obviously, you would have JVM, basic JVM metrics. Java version 11 and up, you can analyze the suspension and you have an history, a real-time history of allocation. So you can look, this object was instantiated by which function on an historical basis, which is really useful to troubleshoot memory leaks. And you have also additional metrics. And it depends on the technology of the server. Let's say that you have a WebLogic. We have automatically collected metrics for, your WebLogic, WebSphere, and whatnot. If they're not automatically collected because you have a custom configuration and you have GMX metrics, we can collect those very easily. You can browse the exposed GMX metrics and select, pick and choose which ones you want to collect, and they're going to be treated as the natively collected metrics by our agent. And here I see that this process is writing to those logs file here. One thing that is really cool and that is new from that's been added in the last year on supported technology such as Java and .NET with commonly used logging framework, we can inject the trace ID of the transaction we're tracing within the log entries. So I'll show that a bit later, which means that if there's a log, you have a backend microservice which has logs. with errors in it, and you're wondering where are those coming from. In fact, maybe I can show you that. I have an example here. So here I'm filtered with what we call management zone. So I only see the logs that are relevant to my team, and I'm looking at a given period of 2 hours of logs. I can filter on errors, want to see what's going wrong with my system. And if I take one example here, what I see is the collector log, and I see the log in context, which is really nice. So I see what process, what host created that log entry. Obviously, if it's within a Dynatrace connector, it's going to be put in context. And what's really nice is I can see the full trace of that log entries. So what is the trace that generated that log entry? So that's a transaction, that's a call, a web call that was made to that checkout service, front-end service, which called another service here and called a bunch of microservice here. And I see here, that's what we call a pure path or distributed trace within Dynatrace. So it's the one agent will stitch automatically all the nodes by which transaction has passed, a web request has passed within your environment. So, and you'll get code level visibility on each of those nodes. So here I have all the function, the call stack, and I see that, oh, there was an exception. If there's exception, you'll see the exception within the code. If those were catched silently, that's really useful. You can have a look at them here. And if there's log entries, you will see that link to that trace, which is really nice. And if I'm looking at that trace and I want to go the other way, I can ask Dynatrace, I want to view all the logs for that trace. So this is all the log for that specific trace, which is really nice. And if I go back to my initial error entry in my log, I can also, when there's real user monitoring, I can put that in context of the end user. So here, view user session. So that's a real user session from an actual user. So I can see all the information, where it's coming from, what type of browser, all the actions that it did going up to that error when he tried to load the checkout page. And I can see the details of what was the experience for that user. I can perform what we call a waterfall analysis. So I see the perspective of the user. So that's the end user action. So this request here has generated an HTTP 500. So, well, that's maybe the reason why there's less sales today on that checkout pages. I should have a look at the code and the exception and the log entries that we were looking at earlier. So that's really useful to, from one way to or the other, to start from the end user experience and be alerted on specific errors that are occurring there. Or if you start from a backend service and you see errors 10 nodes away from the entry point within your complex web application, it's really easy to have everything in context.
So Carl, so what you're saying is that we can go from the user doing something in their browser, loading a page, or clicking on a submit order, and we can now trace that transaction all the way back to the database and through all of the services and queues that are in between the user's browser and that database, or even back to the mainframe for that matter. And I can see logs along the way, and I can, when I'm looking at an item in a log, I can see it in the context of the transaction and this user session. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, absolutely. With code level detail, that's where when I saw that, we had similar kind of visibility with Appmon or legacy solution, and that's where I said it's impossible that collects all the data without impacting our application, but apparently it does. And right now, we're looking at fairly simple environment in our demo environment. A real use case in terms of complexity. Maybe I could show you this here service. I can map what we call a service flow. So here, that's the topology of the last 2 hours of that service. So right now I'm looking at 33,000 web requests to that front-end service. And those are all the nodes that are being called and are being once again mapped in real time. So right now I'm seeing the response time distribution here. That's the percentage that's being shown. I get more data. If I highlight a route here up to a backend microservice, what I see here, I can have a look at the infrastructure, the underlying infrastructure. So it goes from the front end. There's 3 front end. Oh, actually more. There's 4 front end. So I can see the distribution. If the requests are slow, I could see is there any issue in terms of load balancing? Are we having errors on one specific instances or all instances? So I could see that right away. And all the nodes going up to what I highlighted here. So I'll get this level of data here. Once again, 4 instances, and I can see the distribution, the error rate, response time, and I can drill down on those specific components. So that's really useful when you have, if that service here goes wrong, usually you have cascading effect in production. So that's really easy to pinpoint where the pain is coming from. This is a simple one. I can show you what it is, an example of a real life situation in a large enterprise environment. I've blurred things that could help you identify, but that's an example. And this is a front-end application. This is looking at 2 hours of data, which was, I think it was close to 500,000 user action, but those were only the login action. I'm filter right now. You can use filter on that page. So I only filter on the login action of a mobile application. And those are all the components. And no, not all, I'm sorry. These little arrow here means that I'm still missing stream real estate to show the whole service flow of all the components that have been mapped and that are being actively monitored. This is one reason why, observability is a word that is often thrown around. That's the hip word in our world in the last year. Everybody does observability, and when people tell me, I ask people, what is observability? Well, it's logs, traces, and metrics, which to me is news from 10 years ago. First, and secondly, if you only have that and dashboards to show these logs, metrics as pretty as those pane of glass are showing you, it comes a point where the traditional way of working with dashboards and people looking at data, it's not manageable at that scale. It's really not. You need, and I don't want to misuse the term AI, but you need at least an intelligence. And our intelligence is based on the topology model, which we're showing here, on the baselining that it does automatically, and the understanding of all those component communicates. And that's really helpful to pinpoint complex issue in production.
Wow, that's super cool. Hey, listen, Carl, since I got you on this screen right here, so we're looking at the flow from the top down. Well, what if I want to go from the bottom up?
Okay, one thing, often, let's say that this database here, there's an issue in production, and we're bickering for well over an hour right now as to why this component here and this component here and this component here are all red. Their application pool, web request application pool are full. It's starting not answering requests. You have 500 error, CPU resource usage. Well, I've seen real case that often it could be, I'll take a real life example. That database, there's a process, shell script process that was started by a cron job a bit over 1 hour ago. Something that someone forgot that does backup of I don't know what on which partition. But the result of that is that there's one query that is 4 times the response time as the norm. So it goes from, let's say, 20 milliseconds to 80 milliseconds. So the DBA looks at this tool. Well, there's no contention, no really slow query. It's sort of drowned out in the millions of query that this database gets within an hour. But the result of going from 20 milliseconds to 80 milliseconds, well, it's being called thousands of times per minute on that service. So that piles up. The connection pool, the JDBC connection pool for that database fills up. And so you have all those cascading effect and nice errors right up to the end user experience from that front end. So in the case of Dynatrace, if I go from that database here, I can have a look at my database service here. And actually, that's not a good example in this case because I should not select it that way. What I do is
so I think what you're looking for is you go in the ... the ellipsis there. If you go back into
sorry.
Oh, there it is.
Yeah, that's okay. So that screen here is the view that we get for this database, and that view doesn't rely on an agent deployed on the database server. We can have an infrastructure agent to gather metrics, or in this case, it's an RDS. We're going to gather via the Azure integration, and that's where I was a bit mixed up because it looks a bit different within the integration in Azure than the traditional on-prem database. So what I get here is a compound view of all the statements made by, let's say that I have 50 process in java.net, multiple process talking to that database. Well, I can have a look at what we call a backtrace. So what is speaking to that database?
So Carl, while this is building out, let's just finish up on this. And I know you wanted to take us and show us some of the new stuff that's coming out related to business analytics, because we've only got 10 minutes left. And we've got a question from Ahmed about, is the software, will it or will not make it evident if there's intrusion in the network? So Ahmed, if you don't mind, what we want to do is we want to put a little pin in that question. Dynatrace does have AppSec capabilities. We do vulnerability detection on your applications. There is a new component that is currently in preview that is a attack blocking component. And then on top of that, with now what we're doing with Grail, we're going to get even more visibility and insights into what, being able to answer very specific, application security and intrusion related scenarios using this new Grail technology and that DQL query language. So we're gonna come back to that one and do it in depth and really give it a lot of time in another getting to know Dynatrace session. So Carl, why don't you wrap up here, and then you wanted to show us something really exciting.
Yeah. So here I can see from that database without any agent, just by having agents on what talks to that database. So I have all the requests here. I could filter on a specific request, and I see in context all the chain of components that are leading to that request. So in the case of the query that is slower that I was mentioning earlier, the example, well, I could filter on one specific query and write up the chain and understand where is that query coming from. Do I have more of that query today, or is it the same as usual? It's just slower, so I know where to look. Is it the code from one of those nodes, or is it an infrastructure problem at the database level? It's really easy to lead you in the right direction on where you need to investigate. One related parenthesis on security, the depth of data here, even if it's not built for security, I've had a lot of occurrences in my previous life where a security team were consulting Dynatrace data to do forensics. I've made the blue team win against the red team a few times. So yeah, it's it can be used for that, even if it's not built for that, except for vulnerability detection. It can be really useful in that regard. One question that I showed you earlier, log errors in logs. What if the data that you need to diagnose is not in the logs. Unfortunately, logs are not verbose enough, or log level is not right, or there's no code to log the data that you would need to understand why is that request failing. With Grail, this month, what we're launching is what we call business events. And it's going to do something that is amazing that I was waiting for years to be able to do. What we can do with tracing, we can capture code level data within our traces, which means if there's a parameter being passed or returned by a Java function, I can capture that and add that as metadata to our traces. We've been doing that for a year. It's great. The thing, though, is sometimes it's hard to find the right function within Java or .NET that will give you the data that you want. It's in the payload of that request, and we were not able to capture the payload. Well, right now we are. So what we will be able to do this month is capture up to 32 kilobytes of data from the request payload being sent to your services, which means that you can parse as many values from the JSON payload, for instance. And that can be done live. So you're in production and you don't have the data needed to understand why you're getting 500 error or logical error within your service, but you can have a peek at the payload data. So, and we call that business events because that data, contrary to our tracing will do sampling to protect the application that are monitored. If you have millions of requests per hours on one specific service, we cannot collect 100% of data. That would impact the performance of your application. So we don't have there's no magic here. We need to do sampling. We need to protect, and we do that very efficiently. We will always capture as much data as we can without impacting the application. So sometimes, if you want business KPIs that would be in the data, well, we cannot provide an accurate data using request attributes collected within the code because they're sampling. The business events, the payload capturing, it's done without sampling. So you have 100% of the data. It's really close to what you would do using a query in the database. So you can start using Dynatrace to leverage it to get business metrics. So there's an example of data here, account ID. This is captured from a JSON payload on request. And once again, it's stored on Grail. So you can have that data with no sampling, with years of history and no cold storage. With really efficient querying, and you can do complex queries with our DQL engine. Here, I'm filtering on all the events coming from a specific account. I have, if I can copy paste, I won't write that. That would be too long. I can have here. I can filter the sell events, and I want the amounts, the total by account ID. So here, and I want to sort them to see what's the account in the last 7 days that have the most buys. This is from a trading website, a fake trading website. So this is taken from the JSON payload. So once again, or I could have a chart. Instead of, if I don't have a metric, I can use the data that's been collected and have a chart over time of what was the amount. So I can do calculation, extraction of metadata, all different ways to use that data in terms of getting business level KPIs or diagnosing issues where you need to have a look at the payload of your web request to understand where the logs or the traces don't have sufficient data to understand what's going on. So that's something that's really exciting, and I'm really eager to see in use in actual production.
That's super cool. That is very cool.
I think we're over time.
We're pushing the top of the hour, and so we are being pressed for time, folks. You know, Carl, thank you so much for walking us through that demonstration. That was fabulous. We got into some levels of detail that we haven't been able to do and haven't had time to do before. It's absolutely fabulous. I love that you wrap things up with the new business events, which is also a part of what this Grail technology is going to allow us to do. What impressed me was not only how easy it was for you to do those queries, but when you were executing those queries, just how fast you got those responses back. Like, it was just instantaneous. So I think that just goes to show that this underlying Grail technology is really going to propel the Dynatrace platform into areas that we just haven't addressed in the past. So it's an exciting time here at Dynatrace. And Carl, again, thank you very much for the demonstration. Folks, thank you for attending this week's session of Getting to Know Dynatrace. Come on back in a couple more weeks. We'll be doing another session of Getting to Know Dynatrace. You'll be able to, see some new things, and we'll answer whatever sort of questions that you might have. And with that, we're going to call it a day, and we're going to wrap up today's session. Folks, take care, and we'll see you next time on another session of Getting to Know Dynatrace.
Thank you very much.